into the studio and show them. If you don't use either, you have to master the stems to get it to sound right. If you don't do that, then your stereo master sounds like one thing and your Atmos stems sound like it's something else. Like let's say, if we're doing a modern song where there's a new mix and you have full stems, if those stems aren't mastered, there's a real problem. And that I pointed out right away. I said, look, so just let me do it all. I'll do it all, or let me just work with the mastering engineer and we'll get it done together to master those stems. And so to answer the question, it's mostly catalog, but it's turned into like new clients now. All my new clients that I'm doing everything. And the perfect size. It's not the huge ones, just big enough for me. And they work. And I'm in a pretty tight room. And just a quick nutshell on how I got to where I am with the system I chose. I happen to have an 18i20 Focusrite already, which has 10 outputs, I believe. Yeah, it's got 10 outputs with a volume control. And it's like a $300 box. And I was like, hey, I can make a 712 room with this. So then I looked around, went to Guitar Center. I was like, looking at all the speakers and what's the different sizes, what's available. I've got some JBLs, I've got Yamahas, I've got all that, but I don't have 10 of them, So, and then I tried the micros and wound up with the MTM.
And same thing happened, I got the call from the label, hey, so do you do Atmos mixes? And I said the same thing. I said, yeah, and automatically started looking and researching and eventually, did a course with Avid and Dolby and did the certification and all that. But yeah, same thing. Cool.
Echo, I know what it is, but why don't you tell us about your Atmos system?
My room is all focal, but it's a different approach. In my case, I've been mixing for a minute. I started really producing, but back in Puerto Rico, 20-some years ago, nobody knew what a mix was, so I had to learn to mix to make my production sound right. And kind of self-taught myself everything, and then I built the studios. And we had the opportunity in those studios to have Daddy Yankee's album and big chunk of reggaeton that made reggaeton go worldwide happened through those rooms. And I've been friends with Dave for a minute. And I plan to do a facility in Miami, which I just did and opened 2 months ago. It's my spot, but it's also a commercial facility with 3 rooms, 2 stereo rooms and 1 Atmos room. You Candy just visited last week. And then the Atmos room, I thought it was super important because I've been coming to, I think in this business, if you don't see the trends before they happen and you're ready for them, then you're catching up, and that's bad for business. Before all the surround stuff, if you don't have a surround setup, you cannot really emulate it or play it back. Versus Atmos, that when it goes binaural, it's not the same, but it's at least it comes close to the perception-wise. And I'm sure they're gonna keep working on that technology. So we built the room thinking, now everything that I mix stereo, I master it and I mix Atmos. Unless the people are just cheap and they don't want to pay, in that case I print stems and I wait for them to call a few months later.
That's good advice. Always print your stems.
And also there's cases like Ridgewood didn't happen, but he was gonna just go to Miami, which there's so much happening in Miami, and show what he did to the artist or the label or whoever needs to approve or give him feedback, even if it's bullshit, but feedback, or whatever. And you don't want to take your people home, or maybe you need a bigger space to really feel some of the bass and frequencies and dynamics, and it might sound amazing in your spot. That's not perfect, but you want to go to a room that really you can, hear it correctly and loud. And I think that's a room I try to build. My other stereo rooms have amazing Osberger speakers that they've developed and built with me this past year. Because I think we did the studio pretty fast. I took the place like May last year.
That was express mode. So I'm gonna get into the next question, guys. What are the essentials you need to create the studio?
You can start with an entry level, something like We Make, that's affordable, but it's still a pro sound. Like you get an MTM design, once you time align it, it's point source, like ultra flat. So you can start with that and eventually kind of work your way up if you want to expand or like go to a commercial studio. We're talking about like the lab studios in Miami sounds amazing. Like the Focal room was great. Actually, we were there on what was it, Friday, and Atmos mixer Matthew Sim, who's like one of the biggest Atmos mixers in Asia, but also the Chainsmokers, Millennium, just a whole vast array of things. It was cool for him. He was visiting from China. For me to bring him to Echo, hear what it sounds like in a Focal room versus in PMC, Genelec. I think as you just grow into Atmos mixing and learning, obviously we all have our preferences. People like certain cars, people like certain drinks, whatever it is. So you kind of have to figure out your flavor speaker that speaks to you, figure out the acoustics and the best to compensate for that. And then I think just really diving in. I mean, I met some of the top, you had some of the top Atmos mixers on the stage. And I met so many people that are like OGs in the game. And sometimes, they're still online on YouTube trying to figure it out. So that's why, I agree with Echo. Like we're getting our feet wet. Even though it is taking off at a very fast rate, I think there's a lot of things that can be improved on the technology front. Yeah.
Well, obviously the number one thing you need in a studio in general is speakers. With Atmos, I think you have to figure out, am I doing 7.1.4? Is there a reason to go beyond that in a home studio setting? And I would argue that probably not, unless you have a really big room and a big budget, because you can still get it done with the 7.1.4 spec, and I guess even 7.1.2 can work for a lot of people, front and back. The software platform itself, I think, is super key and important. So, we're trying to figure out this great blend between our software platform and, companies like Logic and Nuendo embed the Atmos processor renderer in there. With Pro Tools, you buy the Dolby Atmos renderer and apply it in there. And there's different, if you love working in Logic, we'll keep working in Logic. I think that's a key message. Try not to maybe go beyond and experiment with every last bit of it. Try to put some basics down where you feel comfortable. Converter choices. I'm curious if, could you guys just quickly, without a whole lot, just what do you use for converters for your whole playback system? I think I mentioned already.
Well, I started with the 18920, the small Focusrite, but now I have the Focusrite Line 16, which is great. It's killer.
You can you tell us what you have?
I have Emerging Tech, Anubis with the Happy.
Oh man,
And I love it.
definitely a beautiful system.
Yeah, I love
What's your system?
We've been talking with DAD, is it Denmark? They just came out for NAMM with a product that we were literally waiting on because it was going to come out in October. So we figure out, I said, let me look at all this equipment I got stored before my wife sells it on eBay. And, which actually happened. That's a different story. And for real. So we said we can go by with an Apollo 16 because we have a 7.1.4. But you gotta keep in mind with your I/O converter that depending on your room and the acoustics, you need to delay compensate some of the speakers and correct or enhance your EQ curves. Otherwise, it's gonna sound like crap.
Well, yeah, and I guess UA just came out with an update to their Apollo platform so that you can use it with Atmos.
But now I'm changing like next week to this DAD interface that they just put out, which has everything the Matrix has. You don't need the Pro Tools AC, but you can change the cards, and it has Dante, it has MIDI, it has all kinds of options, and it runs on Thunderbolt 3. So it's a great option.
From a dealer standpoint, we see all these companies trying to come up with the right solution, and some have come up with 80% of the right solution or 90%. And I still think it's, as we're talking about infancy of this format, even it's an infancy in the development of product. And I think you have to kind of navigate it as you go to figure out what's going to work for you, what's going to fit your budget, And I think, like all of these things, monitor control, like if you have a matrix, you can use a DAD mom to control all your volumes, but maybe you have to get on a mouse and do it from there if you don't have a monitor controller. Grace Design makes a really cool monitor control with a card option so you can expand it. It actually has EQs in it. It's not cheap. It's great sounding. But if you're using, let's say, a Focusrite system, you're not going to buy a monitor controller that costs 5 times as much. So when I look at this list of things, I always think of this frame that has to go around it for all of us in the real world, and that's budget, right? So how do I do all of this and not go broke, right? And at the same time, one thing you guys have all expressed is that it wasn't like you jumped out of the box from doing 2-channel work and had all the answers. So the process and the time investment is another thing I think you have to put aside besides the room and other things. And I would turn the question to you, Joao. Acoustically, in a multi-channel room, what are the most important conditions to have?
Yeah, from my point of view as an acoustician, we need to fit. When we're talking about Atmos system, which is a multi-trigger, speakers system. We need to do a slightly different approach compared with the stereo room with big speakers, front speakers, left and right system. So always, need to have a different approach to to do different multi-source triggers are acoustically provoke physical different reactions from all the surfaces. I mean, all the ceiling and all the surfaces.
Right, so you're firing.
Yeah,
You're firing
the
stuff
approach
all
is
over the
slightly
place.
needs to be slightly different than the stereo.
So would
left
you
and right.
say that the surfaces all need to be equal?
Yeah, much more like a combined wall panels, in turning in different frequencies. I mean, the mid-low it has to be more spread into all the surface compared with the left and right system. We can treat the corners and put something on the side walls, but multi-tree surfaces we need to definitely a different approach. We need to spread the porous materials and the low frequency keepers spread a bit more around all the surfaces. Obviously, the ceiling treated as well as the side walls and the front and back walls. So it's a totally different approach.
So yeah, when we're designing studios, let's just say a stereo system, we look at the first reflection. That's the part that's going to come out of your speaker and hit the side wall and may bounce right back to your ears. We want to absorb that. Well, when you have 7 of those going around, it's like, where is that exactly? Where is that first reflection? And so the first thing I do when we're laying out a room is we look at those axes and line up an equal landing point, a target point where that speaker may be getting its first impression, and make sure that those points are all equally treated. So we don't want to have a hot spot here and a warm spot here. We want all of that sort of balance between, and I think it's, if you look at the Dolby spec of where the angles are, it's pretty easy to draw a line and just say, hey, this is the first place that speaker's going. What do I have there? And I ask this question is there an ideal dimension for an immersive studio? Because I think it relates to what we were just talking about, and also the process of the listening experience. Could you tell me just quickly what the size of your room is and maybe the quick dimensions of it?
Yeah, my room is like 12 by 26, so it's a deep, long room in a basement, right? And
What's the ceiling height? Is it 7?
It's 8. I've got 8 up there. I have room for a cloud. So because I had to do it down and dirty and quick and get it right, I looked at the specs and I was like, I don't have the gear. I don't know about this time alignment, all this stuff. So, and I kept looking at the picture. I'm like, this looks like Stonehenge, the way they want the speakers, right? So I'm like, instead of trying to fill up my room, why don't I just create a space for myself? I can even, right? It's like Stonehenge with the ceiling, right? So it's just like an igloo.
So your system is set up around
It's
this
around me,
area,
yes.
but it's not all the way to the back of that 26 foot. I mean,
No.
what you described, the 26 foot by 12, a lot of people have a basement that's sort of like one half of their basement. The other half has your boiler and your other
You got it.
mechanical. So you've got this, what was probably your man cave before.
Well, then it's really, once we got done doing, putting your speakers in for the aux speakers, it was great because the length, the depth gives me all the bass trap I need. So my listening area is great, and I've treated everything around, and I did exactly what you did, just instinctively, because I was like, well, there's a tweeter aimed at that wall, and there's nothing there. Well, let me put something there.
So just a quick question back to process. You have a big main monitor. Well, they're not that big. You have the solo 8 and a sub 12. So but in that room, it's a productive system.
Yeah.
So do you use your main monitors in any way in your workflow with your surround system, or do you
No.
it's
No.
an either or?
It's either or, and I actually have two separate rigs. I went up to the M1 to just rock the Atmos faster, to bounce mixes faster, because doing 1,500 songs, you have to move. You don't have time to waste. But for me, they're separate systems. So I've got a JBL, my old favorite JBL system with the sub is the center, is the left and right with the sub, and the rest is all the IK multimedia.
I got you.
You know.
Ear Kenny, how big is your room? Can you tell us about this? Facing.
14 by 16, 12-foot ceiling.
So you have a nice high ceiling.
Yeah.
And so then you hung them from the ceiling down.
I actually have these stands, the K&M stands,
yeah.
and then those go up maybe 10 feet, and then I have
Right, the Genelecs have a threaded adapter at the bottom, right? So you can.
so I have the clamps.
The clamps, okay.
For,
That's cool.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's a really a good example of like some of the challenges that come up is like, how am I going to put the speaker up and where do I want to have it? Dolby's spec says the ideal optimum height is 7'6" from a seated position, but if you have a bigger room, you might want to have it up higher because your mains might be up higher. In a home studio, very few of us have 12-foot ceilings in our home studios, but deluxe over there. Echo, I don't recall exactly the dimensions. Can you
Our dimensions are 12 by 18 by 8, almost 9 ceiling height. But we were able to kind of trial, test different outputs from the form that Dolby tells you where you should place your speakers with dimensions till it sounded right. Because if you go too mathematical, I think it's important for you to do something that works for your ear. Because at the end of the day, we're listening, we're discovering this whole technology at the same time that Dolby, I think, is doing it. And it's going to be our input that's going to make it grow, etc.
So from my perspective as a studio designer, I would say if I could have my choice, it would be a fairly equidistance type of a room so that I could have the speakers equidistance and have the ceiling height equidistance. And so, if you have a 9-foot ceiling and I could maybe have a 12 by 12 room, I could make that work. If I had an 8-foot ceiling, I could make that work. Where you get to challenges in a home studio is when the ceiling height in your basement is lower than 7'6", where your speakers are going to be really low, unless you maybe get a really low chair. I don't know. You can maybe get the same experience. If the reflections from our ceiling are as active as our speaker, this becomes another voice that confuses the image. So this is where acoustics comes back in, and treating a low ceiling, like we can't put giant bass traps up there. We can't put something that's 8 inches and suddenly we can't even walk in the room. So sometimes we look to very small, thin, Joe Cave has a product that's a bass melt panel that's 1 inch thick, but it takes off a lot of the first reflection, and it actually can can actually self-adhere right to the surface, and it could be a good way in a low ceiling environment to take off that first piece. And it doesn't have to be a Joe Cave panel; it could be any kind of foam that hopefully looks nice enough to make you feel good in there. But ceiling height is a key thing. So if you're looking in your house and thinking like, where do I want this room? You're better off in a small bedroom and keep your system small and have that 8-foot clearance than going to the basement. Some basements I've been in, you're just under 7 feet, and by the time you put acoustics and speaker there, it's going to be hitting you in the head. So I think that's something to really consider when you're looking at planning your room. I'm curious about the receiving position. Do you guys, you know, for stereo, I remember looking at your room and you were right up at the front of your room. Do you sit there when you're mixing Atmos?
Yes, I stay at one spot. It's all focused around that one spot.
But that's because the speakers are equidistant around that spot?
Exactly.
Okay,
Exactly.
and how about you here, Kenny?
The same. I have my stereo setup as well, and like you, with 2 separate systems. Just because sometimes there's so much work going on that like to just have one system, and then like for instance working on the Atmos stuff, but then I gotta do a stereo export or change of revision or whatever to change the playback engine, and Pro Tools to Dolby Atmos. It's always a kind of a pain,
So, Echo, in your room, I know we're a little forward in the room, but you've got a pretty big system in the back.
Yeah, we that room we don't do much stereo work, although it also happens, but not as much as Atmos work. And the sitting position is literally a little bit towards the front, but almost towards the back of the seat, right in front of the side speakers.
Right, so you're
And it makes a huge difference, at least in my room, where you listen to it and where you position yourself when you're playing it back.
I think this issue, if you're trying to take your stereo room and make it Atmos, you really have to think about this equidistance of the speakers at that position. Because sometimes that's where we're comfortable, that's where our desk is, that's where, I don't want to like suddenly pull my desk back to the middle of the room. I want to be where I'm comfortable. So it's something to consider when you're looking at your room and your space. If you're starting from scratch and it's just going to be an Atmos room, I would say the middle of the room is a pretty good spot if you have your speakers equidistant to that. And that's also going to give you equidistance to your boundaries. And again, what we're always trying to get is the most direct path between the speaker and our ear without the room. It's easier in a stereo room to do that, by the way. It's not so easy in an immersive room.
One more thing that I know Rich mentioned, the fact of visualizing this whole Atmos possibilities of position of the sound coming to you. You need to visualize yourself on an igloo, because that's the experience you want to provide the listener. And the reason we're going to do studios is so anybody that listens to it for eternity can have the same experience that we had in the studio when we were making it. And I think the igloo visual part makes you understand better all the bands and points where you can position stuff, because it's literally thinking that sound can come out from any part of the igloo, except from the LFE, but it helps a lot, because if you find a spot where you can have an igloo of speakers in your home, that's the place to literally build the room.
That's great advice. Alex, when I saw the IK booth during setup, I was like, oh, that's cool. All of their speakers are mounted on mic stands, heavy-duty mic stands, and they can kind of manipulate it. And of course, they don't have a room because they have a big, it's just in the exhibit hall. But actually, when you sit in the right spot, every speaker could be kind of positioned to be what it is. But if you had a big stereo system in your studio, and maybe the work you're doing in Atmos is only sometimes, you could push those out to the side and bring them back in, mark your floor, and say, hey, this is where I like it. And it's really a flexible way to add Atmos without, really having to rethink mounting, positioning, and space use. Because as we learn this format and we learn how to mix in that format, we may not have paying work in that format just yet. So we got to maybe invest in one of my clients right now. When he got he actually has an Osberger Atmos system here in Burbank, and it's an experience. You can actually hear the experience in our booth. But he spent 2 months doing nothing but doing remixes, taking old projects that he had, and converting them into Atmos mixes. And his stuff is pretty interesting. And they do a lot of dance music, and he's actually going to be doing a demo in our booth, I think tomorrow. Tomorrow. And the remixes he's doing in Atmos are almost like they're like a performance. And so, I think everybody has this chance to do it the way you want to do it. And I think there's things coming. Like right now, we don't think of like, I'm producing in Atmos, I'm performing in Atmos, I'm capturing this keyboard in Atmos. all of you guys are mixing in Atmos, but
When I did that room specifically, if you remember, it's like a rectangular, but it has like a intent, say for like keyboards. I always thought that I need to start producing, which I've been messing with, producing in Atmos. Because it's the same way as when you record a record well from the first time you position your first mic, the mix comes out so much greater than when you're just getting whoever sent it to you, which have no idea what they did, and then this just win Grammys and sell billions. I think Atmos, to the extent where producers get involved in positioning sounds as we create, is going to have way more potential to transmit the experience once it's mixed. So I definitely thought of that in my room because I will be doing it.
I skipped the previous title because we already talked about a little of the acoustic challenges. You know, I think one of the things that we've identified is there's a lot of different ways to do this, and I'm excited about the idea of producing in Atmos where we're actually conceiving of this work as we go. And I saw some new companies, Sound Particles, that's making instruments that are designed to be produced in Atmos. So it looks really interesting. I'm going to go check them out. We have a guy coming, a guy named Sharuz, who's a keyboard or expert in creating sounds and instruments, and he's going to be doing a little demo of his new synth that has multiple outputs, and you can direct the sounds in different places. And I'm excited to just hear that in our system as an experience. First time hearing it anywhere is here at the NAMM show. But I think there's more coming in that arena. Obviously, we've got car companies putting it in more and more. Of course, it started at the luxury Tesla, some of the Mercedes. But I heard Kia's coming out with a car that's got Atmos in it and immersive audio in it. And I personally believe that one of the great venues for immersive music as a listener is your car. We know where you're going to sit. We can tune the acoustics for that. We can point the speakers kind of where we want you to hear it from. So I'm excited to hear some of those car developments. Dolby has the Tesla down in their booth, and if you haven't had the experience, it's definitely worth checking it out, because I think as a listening to music part of, how many people here love music? It's like why I'm here, okay? And I think as engineers, producers, artists, we're all looking to be stimulated by what we do. We want, if we wanted to be bored, we'd be selling insurance, right? So I want to be engaged in the process. I want to be engaged in every part of it. I guess I'll just start, Joao, you mentioned some of the things about focusing. What do you think the biggest challenge is in creating an immersive studio from a design and acoustic standpoint?
We already talking about about the height of your room. I think the biggest challenge is solve in a way to put some bass traps in the ceiling. You cannot, because you cannot have that much thickness to do it. So in my point of view, at Atmos, listening room or control room, my idea is to spread pellets equally in all the surface, and it will be a huge challenge if you don't have a chance to have the correct proportions in between the length, the height, and the width. But yeah, we have solutions for mostly for free, almost everything. So, but if you can do it correctly from the scratch, it's always better. And just to conclude, one thing, I think it's one made by scratch for Atmos listening system. One control room based in this all the correct steps. It's served better than the left and right standard stereo system than the opposite. So I think we need to make always just some fine tunings when you make an upgrade. So maybe in your guys' example, you need to change something when you we buy the Atmos system. I don't know if it's I'm totally right, but in my point of view, it makes all sense. One room made by Surf Atmos system is separate where the left and right, master system. We do.
One quick question again on acoustics. Does diffusion have any place in a multi-channel room?
Yeah. Mostly the stereo rooms we have plenty of back wall diffuser, wall to scattering the first reflection from the left and right speakers. So in multiple sources, we need to spread a little bit diffuser also in two placements, on the left and right. For the walls, always there have space to do it as well in the same way on the ceiling as well.
So you would space diffusion, absorption, and then bass traps more.
And bass traps.
So like normally in a stereo room, a lot of times we put the bass traps at the rear of the room, which is kind of like we're launching the sound from the front, we're going to land it in the back, and those corners are going to be the most productive place. And corners are still the most productive place to get bass absorbed, so you can have your front and back corners, but maybe we need a couple panels in the ceiling, maybe a couple of bass traps around the side, interspersed with diffusion and absorption.
Yeah.
In an ideal world, if you have an unlimited budget, if you have a limited budget, then you kind of pick and choose. Sometimes you have to pick the most problematic issue first, and then add some to that. Echo, what do you think the biggest challenge in creating your immersive studio?
I think in my case it was figuring out the balance to where my budget will allow me to do what, and then keep growing as the demand can fit in the room, which I can probably say I opened the room in February 2nd, and the work we've done so far in that room has already at least paid for a third of it in 2 months. And I think my biggest advice will be, even though there's a lot of very intense technical aspects of doing Atmos, like understanding the render and the Dolby, that's a college course by itself. The regular mixing aspect, because there's a lot of, unfortunately, as mixers, when we get great stems or session or sounds recorded, we are able to deliver amazing mixes. But a lot of the time we also get crap. We cannot say, you gave me crap, we need to deliver gold. And Atmos is a little more difficult, like Rich mentioned in the beginning. If your stems are not at least compressed and some of them may be normalized or limited, you're gonna have a big difficult time trying to make
get the energy right.
It's the energy and the feel, especially in hip hop and urban music and energy oriented music. But I wouldn't pay so much attention to all the technical part. I will figure out, understand what the technology is and where it's gonna go, and what you need to do. Starting with the speakers, obviously, because it would be stupid to buy bad speakers and spend $10,000 on an I/O converter. Do a system that lets you start to get your feet wet with this and start working on it, because the demand is growing so fast that to mention that you guys don't start working on it, we're just gonna make more money, which is amazing, and it's great. But this is gonna grow logarithmically in the next years.
That's great advice. I'd love to hear from you. We only have a little bit of time, so, Ken, could you tell us your biggest challenge getting your rig together?
I would say setting up the speakers, with the timing, the proper delay and EQ and phasing and all
You have a
that.
Genelec with a SAM
Which is
system?
why I went with the Genelec system, because I set the mic where I sit and I automatically tune it to the room, and it takes care of all the any phasing issues and EQ, and it's pretty cool.
They definitely have a great engineered solution that allows you to network them and look at them all, measure them, and it does the job for you. I guess from a manufacturer standpoint, Alex, what do you think the biggest challenges are on your end making products for this market?
I think the most interesting challenge, I guess, it's almost like we're part of a new movement. It's like we're starting and transitioning into a new format. And so I think the learning curve for people that are new to the format mean, it can seem overwhelming, but when you really kind of just dive in and spend the time, he was like 20 minutes a day watching YouTube and trying to like you know, you guys brought up, you know, focusing on more of the render, you know, how the fold out works and using your existing projects. I think the challenge is how to make it affordable as a company. So like, we didn't have the iLevel MTMs just for Atmos. They've been standard. I mean, you've been using them for years in stereo. And so the company, because, you know, we're starting the iRig, and it's a company that's really based on innovation and technology. They had the foresight to make each iLevel MTM with a thread that's a 3/8 that you screw onto a standard mic stand. So for someone that's starting out, I mean, I guess the best way to put it is like, who wants to lose their security deposit in their apartment or condo drilling into the ceiling? Luckily, you know, IK had the foresight to make the thread up on them. So like at our booth, you could throw it up on booms. So I mean, you could fit in 10 by 10, like I did at AES in different rooms, you know, worked in. And but we did an event at Power Station in New York in Studio C, and we threw that up and massive ATC sub and everything. So it's nice because this is a 7.4 solution. We don't make a sub yet, but you kind of just choose your own flavor sub. It's $4 for 11 speakers. You throw it on stands. I mean, it's really the thing I love about what we're doing. I feel like because we have the DSP technology, we're able to make it more affordable. So as a producer and engineer, like first and foremost, like other than marketing, you want to make it accessible. Like we don't have all 60 Gs just sitting around like, oh, let me get a Focal system. Some of us do. So it's kind of, you choose your own path.
Don't look at me. Don't look at me. So, Rich, I'm gonna ask you to, you know, as we're winding down, and maybe we might have a couple minutes for some questions.
All right.
Just before, one challenge, one answer. Atmos, what's your biggest challenge?
What was the biggest challenge? To get my room to be, to do the bare minimum system and to get my room to translate.
Well, that's everybody's challenge everywhere, so keep going.
All right, keep going a little bit more.
So no,
Well,
no,
I do-
meant to say like, I think we're all on that path, right? No matter what kind of room is, I want the room to work for me in my ears, but I want it to work in my car. I want it to work when my client goes home. Like, if you did all that work you guys did, I mean, each one of you have been on a journey, which is exciting, I think, to hear their journeys. And as a provider, every time we're doing one of these projects, I learn something new, like almost nonstop. And I think as engineers, you know, when you're working stereo and you've done 1,000 records, it's, you know, your craft is honed, you know it. This is a chance to get into the discomfort of not knowing something. So, you know, for me, I think the challenge is to work with clients and still not be expert just yet, because actually, no one's an expert just yet, right?
We're all figuring it out.
We're all figuring it out. Hey, I want to thank you guys for giving us 50 minutes of your time. If you guys want to hear the ultimate Osberger experience of Atmos, come to my booth, 15308 in the North Hall. Can't miss it. There are a lot of white speakers in there that'll give you an experience. I really want to thank you guys for participating.